Wanna play?
Here's Johnny!
I need a bigger boat.
What's your favorite scary movie?
We have such sights to show you.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Hey everybody, welcome back to Wanna Play. My name is James McKenna, and today we're going to be doing yet another top 10 list. It's been a while since I've done one of these top 10 lists on my own. Usually I do collabs with people, but this is kind of for like a bigger video down the line. More on that in a little bit, but today we're going to be counting down my top 10 favorite horror franchises. Now what I count as a franchise is any movie series with more than 3 movies. So 4 movies or more is what I count as a franchise. 2 movies is just a movie and a sequel. 3 movies I just count as a trilogy, so we're not going to be seeing like The Collector because there's only 2 of those, and we're not going to be seeing It because there's only 3 of those. So anything above 3 movies is what I count as a franchise. And before we get into this, there are a few franchises that I still have yet to see. Probably the 2 biggest, I haven't seen Alien or Saw. I've seen the first 2 of those franchises, but I haven't seen any of the sequels, so this list might get outdated pretty quickly. But without any further ado, let's get straight into it. But before we get right into things, I'm going to be doing my honorable mentions. Usually I don't do these for videos with just me. Usually I save those for collabs to make those seem bigger. But I feel like this is such a big topic that it kind of deserves honorable mentions. So my honorable mentions are going to be Carrie, Phantasm, George Romero's Living Dead, Evil Dead, and The Purge. All of them were almost made the list, but they just got edged out because all of those franchises have at least one movie that just brought it down a lot for me. So let's get right into my number 10. So coming in at number 10 is going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love the Texas Chainsaw franchise. It's honestly really good. I don't really think that there is an awful movie in the series. Like, sure, there are some that are worse than others, but none of them are bad. You have the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which isn't my favorite, but it is an absolute classic that everybody knows of, everybody loves. Then Texas Chainsaw 2, one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's so good, it's so funny, the kills are amazing. 3 and 4 are the only ones where it's like, maybe, yeah, they're not the best, but they're not as bad as some entries in other franchises that I'm going to be talking about. And then you have the remake and the prequel to the remake, which are probably one of the best remakes in horror and one of the best prequels in horror. Texas Chainsaw 3D is another one that I find underrated. I really enjoyed Texas Chainsaw 3D, and I don't really understand. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of random stuff that doesn't make sense, but Texas Chainsaw 3D to me is honestly a fun ride. And then the newest one, Leatherface, a prequel to the original, which I honestly found pretty good. Not my favorite, but it is pretty good. So number 10 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And at number 9 is another one where I wouldn't really say that the original is my favorite, but the original is still, it's still mostly a classic, and that is Leprechaun. Leprechaun might be the most fun franchise out there. It's such, not really an original concept because it's a leprechaun, but it's just like so different. It takes this nice, friendly, child-friendly folktale and turns it into this maniac serial killer. And it's honestly it's just a blast. The first Leprechaun, I feel like it's not the best. It's a little bit slow at times, but it is still great. Leprechaun 2, people hate on, but I tend to like. I think Leprechaun 2 is honestly so bad that it's good. Leprechaun 3, the dude's in Vegas. What more can I say? It's Leprechaun in Vegas. It's great. Leprechaun 4, in space, it's not my favorite, but people do tend to like it a lot. 5, In the Hood, and 6, Back to the Hood. I prefer In the Hood much more than Back to the Hood, but they're both still pretty fun entries into the series. Then you have Leprechaun Returns, the newest one, and it's just... Leprechaun Returns is one of the best final entries to a series that we've gotten in horror. It's honestly really underrated and it's really good. I don't really care that Warwick Davis was replaced in that one because it's still a fun ride and it's a fun Leprechaun movie. So Leprechaun comes in at number 9. And at number 8 is going to be Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th might be the most classic and well-known horror franchise there is. It's just awesome. It's Jason. Everybody knows Jason. The first Friday the 13th didn't have Jason in it, but it still is one of my favorite slashers of all time. Part 2, honestly, I think probably improved on the original. Part 3 and 4 aren't the best, but they're still pretty good. There are a lot of memorable moments from those. Part 5, the most kills, the most gore. Part 5 is just a fun ride. Part 6 is great. It's not my favorite in the franchise like most people would say, but it is still fun. Part 7 is my favorite. It's literally this girl with telekinesis going up against Jason, and it's just, that one's a blast because that has the best looking Jason, the best like feeling. It's the best Friday the 13th altogether. Like it combines the best elements of the franchise all in one movie, and it's great. Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, probably the most underrated in the series. I love it. It's a blast from the beginning to the end. People don't like it because of the misleading title, but I mean, whatever. He's in Manhattan. I mean, I don't know what else they would call it to sell the movie. Then you get to Part 9 and Part 10, which are admittedly much goofier and kind of like schlockier than the other ones. They're not great, but they are still pretty fun. They have memorable moments. And then Freddy vs. Jason comes along. It's Freddy Krueger fighting Jason. It's an absolute blast. Freddy vs. Jason might be the best horror crossover of all time. And then the remake is one of the best horror remakes ever. So at number 8 is Friday the 13th. And at number 7 is the one with the new entry coming out next year, around this time actually. That is Scream. Scream is another just really fun, creative franchise. Everybody's seen the first Scream, everybody knows the rules, and the second, third, and fourth aren't bad either. I mean, they're all really good. Part 2 and Part 4, my other favorites. I can never really decide which one I prefer between Part 2 and 4. They have their moments of greatness, and then they also have moments that aren't the best, but they are still really good movies. And then Part 3 is basically universally agreed to be the worst, but it's still not a bad movie by any means. It just has a little bit of plot holes here and there. It's still a good movie, Scream 3, and the rest just carry the franchise so much, and I cannot wait for Part 5. I honestly have all the faith in the world for Radio Silence to direct this, and all the old cast that's coming back. Scream 5 I honestly think is going to be great, which is why it earns a spot on this list. Number 6, another franchise with only 4 movies, that's Hatchet. Hatchet is the newest franchise on this list, with the original coming out in 2009, I believe. But all 4 movies are an absolute blast. This is probably the most consistent franchise out of all of them. There isn't a single bad movie. Even the worst one, Victor Crowley, is still one of the best horror sequels out there. It's great. And then Hatchet 2 and 3 are just an absolute blast, with one of the best final girls of all time. And Kane Hodder, like, just acting outside of a mask, he's great in here. Kane Hodder is amazing. It's got some amazing kills, especially that original one. Some awesome kills, and honestly, I think it has some of the best jump scares in horror too. Hatchet is an absolute blast of a franchise. It's kind of like a spoof of all the old 80s crazy slasher movies like Sleepaway Camp and all those ones. And it honestly is really underrated. I feel like more people should be aware of the Hatchet series, and it honestly earns a spot on my list. It's an absolute blast of a franchise. It's Hatchet. It's got to be on this list. And at number 5 is Halloween. I feel like I kind of like Halloween as a franchise more than most other people do. I feel like there's a lot more good Halloween movies than there are bad Halloween movies, and I think most people kind of tend to disagree. The first Halloween and the second are both classics, obviously. They're Halloween and Halloween 2. Halloween 3, I don't know if it's not my favorite in the franchise. Halloween, the first one, is my favorite, but it's definitely the most rewatchable and the most fun. Season of the Witch. Part 4 is great. It's not as good as the first 3, but it is great. Then you get to 5 and 6, and they suck. They suck. H2O is a nice kind of like return to form for the series. You got Laurie Strode coming back, and you got some great characters in there. Just the mask is kind of trash. There's a lot less redeeming qualities about H2O than others in the franchise, but it still is one of the best. Resurrection sucks, and then the Halloween remakes, I honestly think are really good. Now, I'm probably on an island with that one, but I honestly really do like Halloween, and especially Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. I don't know what it is, but I'm just really like attracted to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. It's so good. It honestly, it's a good like emotional movie for me at least. People don't like it, but I think it's honestly great. And then the newest one, Halloween 2018, is phenomenal. It's so damn good. It's so good. It's the perfect return to form from like the original series. It's got the best Halloween atmosphere. It's the best sequel that kind of negates some of the other ones. It's great. Halloween 2018 is one of the best movies that came out in the 2010s, or at least horror movies. And Halloween, I feel like just because of Michael Myers and how iconic he is, Halloween kind of deserves a spot on my list. Number 4. Now, I know people are gonna hate on me for this pick, but be honest, everybody has their guilty pleasure franchise, whether it be Children of the Corn, Puppet Master, the Evil Bong series, and my guilty pleasure series is definitely Hellraiser. It's just because of Pinhead. It's just because of Pinhead. He's my favorite horror icon of all time. His look is just so... He looks most like a horror villain. Like, if you were gonna take a horror villain that looks the most, that represents horror as a genre the most, it's gotta be Pinhead. And the movies aren't too bad either. Some of them are awful, but other ones are really good. The first 5, I think, are fantastic. Even though the 5th one, yes, it's adapted from a different story and Pinhead's barely in it, I think it is a good story, part 5. And the first 3 are great. You got the first and the second, obviously, I think are a great double feature. Part 3 is just an absolute blast, especially when you get to the end. The end scene in part 3 when they're out on the streets is just such a fun... It's just such a fun scene, that scene, when you get all the crazy Cenobites, who I'm probably like the only person in the world who actually likes, when you got Camera Head showing up, and you got the barbed wire guy showing up, and you got Piston Head showing up. It's a blast of a movie. Part 4 is great. One of the only good horror movies in space is Part 4. Part 6 and Part 7 are... They're not bad, but they're just so forgettable that it's... I feel like those 2 movies kind of bring down the franchise a little bit for me. Part 8, people say all the time, is like the worst in the series. I honestly liked it as a guilty pleasure. Revelation's bottom 3 horror movies of all time. It sucks. It's trash. And then Hellraiser Judgment is honestly a really fun movie. Yes, it's a ripoff of 7, but I think they did a good job with it. Such a good job that Heather Langenkamp was in it. So number 4 is Hellraiser. And at number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street. This probably has the most fun movies out of at least the big 3, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. And it also is probably the most consistent. I really, really love the original. Although it isn't my favorite in the franchise, it's like top 2 or 3 in the franchise. But the original is an absolute classic. Everybody knows Nightmare on Elm Street. Everybody loves it. Part 2 might be my favorite in the franchise. As I said, in our last collab video, but Part 2 is just such an underrated and fun and goofy horror movie. Part 3 is definitely the best made, best thought, best script of the franchise. Part 3 is awesome. It's an awesome movie. Although it just got bogged down one spot to number 2 by Freddy's Revenge, it still is a fantastic movie. Part 4 I feel like is the movie where people start to hate the franchise, and Part 4 it's absolutely not. I dislike Part 4 more than most people do. It's just forgettable and there's nothing really funny about it. It kind of tries a little bit too hard, and also they kill off all the good characters from Part 3. It just sucks to me. Part 5 and Part 6 I tend to like more than other people do, but I'm still not going to defend them because they're both pretty terrible. But then Wes Craven's New Nightmare comes along, it kind of saves the franchise, boosts it up. Once again, not my favorite, but it is still like, it's kind of Wes Craven's precursor to Scream. And then, of course, Freddy vs. Jason, an absolute blast, as I said before, and then the remake comes along and it's the worst in the franchise. So, number 3 has got to be Nightmare on Elm Street, basically just because of the original trilogy and just how fun those first 3 movies are. So yeah, it's got to be Elm Street. Number 2 and number 1. I've stated before that both of these are my favorite franchise, and I'm not really going to do a tie here because that would kind of be unfair, so I kind of had to make a decision here of which franchise truly is my favorite. It was tough. These two are easily the most debated for me because they're both just so good franchises with like barely any bad movies in it, and they're just so much fun to watch. And at number 2 is gonna be Psycho. It's the most underrated horror franchise there is. It's so damn good. Anthony Perkins plays Norman Bates throughout all of them except for the remake, but he's fantastic in that role. He doesn't get any better than the original, but he doesn't get any worse. So it's basically kind of the same character all the way through, but he like changes throughout the franchise. And Norman Bates is just one of my favorite characters in movies in general, in anything in general. Norman Bates is just such a good character. The first one, obviously, top 10 horror movies of all time, easily. Part 2 is so good. Part 2 might have the best story in the entire franchise, and Part 2 is honestly it's probably the most underrated movie in the franchise because it is really good, and it was directed by the same guy who directed the original Child's Play. Part 3, it's more forgettable than the first 2, but there are still some great kills and fun characters in this movie. And then Part 4 is probably my favorite sequel because it's a sequel and a prequel at the same time, and they did a really good and creative job with it. Like, all the stories kind of combined together in the end, and it's just, the ending is just such a good send-off for Norman Bates. He just leaves in peace, and then that's the end of the franchise until I guess the remake, but the remake is literally shot for shot. The original, the remake might be the reason why this isn't number 1 because it's just so dumb. Its existence is so dumb, but the other movies are just still so good that it boosts Psycho up to number 2 on my list. But in at number 1 is the first horror franchise that I actually watched all the way through, and since then I've seen all the movies like 3 times at least. That is, of course, Child's Play. It's freaking Child's Play. It's Chucky, the killer doll, and he's such a blast. Like, you have no idea. If you haven't seen these movies, you have to check them out. When I was a kid, as I've said before, Chucky used to terrify. Like, terrify wasn't even like the right word. He scared me so much. And then once I actually started watching the movies, they're just so fun. The original Child's Play is probably, I'm not saying it's the least fun of the franchise, but it's not as fun as the other ones I get, but it's still one of the best, most suspenseful and scariest horror movies of all time. Part 2 kind of has that mixture. It's still really scary, but you're starting to get a little bit more fun. Part 3 Chucky's cracking one-liners here, there, and everywhere, and part 3 definitely has the best one-liners, and part 3 of the original trilogy, at least, I think has the best Chucky. It has the best looking Chucky. It's got the best... Chucky in part 3 is just awesome. And then Bride of Chucky, of course, one of the best horror sequels ever made. It's so good. Some people don't like it because it is so different from the rest of the franchise, but I honestly think that that's why it's so good, because it's so unbelievably different. Like, change the characters around and just change the title, you got a brand new movie and nobody would question. Nobody would even begin to think that that was a Chucky movie. Seed of Chucky is bad, but I feel like I am starting a little bit to come around to it, because it is Chucky. It does have the best looking Chucky, and Seed of Chucky is, I feel like, better than people give it credit for, even though it is still awful. I'm starting to come around a little bit to it. Maybe in a year from now I'm gonna love it, but who knows? And then Curse and Cult just revitalized the franchise so unbelievably well, especially Cult, one of the best entries into the franchise. Don Mancini, when he took over the role as like director from Seed of Chucky onward, he just completely reinvented the franchise, and I really like and respect how he does something different with each and every movie. Child's Play is just so good. I cannot wait for that TV series to come out later this year. It's gonna be awesome. Also, there's a remake, but Child's Play is definitely my favorite horror franchise of all time. Psycho is the only one that comes close, but number 1 has to be Child's Play. Thanks for watching my ranking on my top 10 favorite horror franchises of all time. Now, in the intro, I said that this is going to lead up to another video, and probably that's going to be next week, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank every movie that I talked about in here. So every single movie in all of these franchises and my top 10 favorite horror franchises are all going to be ranked in one big video coming up pretty soon. I have some other big videos planned. I'm going to do a walkthrough on Misery pretty soon, and just a lot of other stuff. We're going to be doing our top 10 favorite 2000s horror movies pretty soon, and the schedule is just going to be big video after big video after big video for a while. So thank you for watching. Goodbye and good night.